First thing I must do is my girlfriend in Kiev, she doesn't believe that I'm intelligent enough to do a talk in front of an audience. So I have to prove her wrong. So if everyone can say, her name's Lukeria, hello Lukeria. 1, 2, 3. Hello Lukeria. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm a little bit tired today. Чуть-чуть устал, потому что я работал сегодня in the mine in Червоноград, and I got the night train last night. So I've been working all day without any sleep, but I'm going to do my best. I got this wonderful statue from the mine. And I had lots of help from Olga and Andre and Sveta, who took me there. So I was thinking the other day, why did I become a fantastic, thank you, coffee. Why did I become a photographer and not a sculptor or a painter or a writer or something like that? And I think the reason is formative. It's to do with childhood, as is the case with lots of photographers. It's to do with a very strange childhood. So this is me, and this is my parents, and this is my grandfather. He used to be captain of a ship during World War II. And when he came back, he just used to shout at everyone in the family. And he had post-traumatic stress disorder very badly. And he couldn't communicate properly with people anymore. So all he would do was either shout at them or take their picture. So I realized from a very early age that this box he had, this little brown box, this brownie camera, was a very powerful tool for communication. That made a very big impression on me. So the other thing that made a big impression on me, I know it's very hard to relate this aging Adonis you see before you with these pictures here, taken in Paris and Milan at Yves Saint Laurent Fashion Week. But this is me doing catwalk shows in 1991, so 30 years ago. And why it had a big impression on me was it really showed me how photography commodifies people. So it takes all of us from living, breathing, smelling things into this two-dimensional plane. So those two experiences with fashion and with my very angry grandfather made me think about using photography in an ethical way, thinking about how could I use it in a positive way, not an exploitative way. So the first breakthrough project I had was this. It's called the Port Glasgow Book Project. And I won a competition to do a public artwork in this small town on the west coast of Scotland called Port Glasgow. And instead of saying, I'm going to build a sculpture of, you know, a famous poet or a famous politician in bronze, I said, I'm going to do a book all about the town of Port Glasgow. And I'm going to give a copy of the book to every single person, every single house anyway, in the whole of Port Glasgow. So there are about 8,000 homes in this small town, Port Glasgow, on the west coast of Scotland, and every single home received a copy of my book. And it was a kind of critique of the way in which these coffee table books depicting poverty and hardship always end up on the coffee tables of white, privileged, middle-class people like me, and not on the coffee tables of the people who are actually represented in the book. So it's a kind of critique, a kind of subversion of the whole genre of photo books. So Port Glasgow itself is a former shipbuilding town. So it used to be the world centre for shipbuilding 50 years ago, and there's only one shipyard left now. This is the first picture in the book. It's a kind of metaphor for Port Glasgow, beautiful but damaged. Yes, the National Portrait Gallery in London bought this picture from me, and I asked that they make it into their Christmas card, but for some reason they weren't into that. I don't know why. So I was already thinking about subverting the genre of social documentary. So I thought, why not make some costumes and give them to people to wear? So I contacted a fashion designer friend of mine and I said, can you make me some hats that look kind of futuristic, but also a bit kind of 1920s? And we'll take them down the local pub and get people to dress up in them so that people looking at the book in 50 years' time will go, wow, look at the hats that people used to wear in Port Glasgow in 2003. And it would be a total fiction, total bullshit. Some of the pictures are more like fashion. These guys are from a homeless centre. Some are kind of fly-on-the-wall documentary. So there's a whole mix of different styles. And the idea was to challenge this kind of authorial magnum photo book. Some of the pictures are based on paintings. So this is based on a painting by Joseph Wright of Derby from the 1800s. This is a local Catholic club. So what I really didn't understand is that they have a very big, strong Catholic community on the west coast of Scotland and a very big, strong Protestant community on the west coast of Scotland. And this project really inadvertently exposed that different tension between these two religions. This is a Bonnie Baby competition. So the best known images in the book are these, which are taken at Port Glasgow Town Hall. And it was my first time doing a photo book, my first time doing social documentary photography. So I thought, wouldn't it be great to do a picture of lots of people dancing so that you could see all their faces? So these parties happen at the Port Glasgow Town Hall every night for about a week. And they're completely like a massive over-the-top orgy, basically. And before the party started, I spent a week installing these huge flash units in the rigging. So this is about 10 meters high. So I had about 6 of these flash units. So the idea was that the flash on my camera would set off all these other flashes and you'd get a big explosion of light and everyone would be clearly depicted and there'd be a big depth of field so that Betty in the front here would be clear and so would someone like 10 meters away be clear as well. But unfortunately, this was about 20 years ago, and people had these disposable cameras with flashes on them. So they would go to take a picture of their friends with this camera, and the flash on their camera would set off all the other flashes. Oh my God, that's an incredible camera. It only cost me like 100 hryvnias. It's so good, so strong. So I had to go around apologizing to all these people whose photographs were terribly overexposed because of my massive flash construction.
I'm sorry?
Yes.
But did the people know that you're gonna make those pictures before this party?
Yeah, the people who ran Port Glasgow Town Hall, so it's a public hall run by the town municipality, they gave me permission. And so individually, no, but I was very transparent afterwards with the pictures and I said, you know, and actually before I went to print the book, I had small exhibitions in all the shops, like the post office, the butchers, and I said, I'm going to print these images. If anyone in the town has problems with any of these images, please let me know, because, you know, you can quite easily destroy someone's life if, you know, you take a picture and there's someone kissing someone they shouldn't hear, and everyone in the whole town gets a copy of the book, you know. So I had to be quite careful, but luckily, you know, no one was really offended or upset. So here you can see, you know, one of these big umbrella flashes at the top here, and there's a couple more here. There's about 6 in total. So it was about turning a party venue into my own personal studio somehow. So the other thing I did to try and subvert the conventions of a social documentary photo book was to think about dissemination. So I'd already decided the only people who were going to get my book were the people who lived in Port Glasgow. But then I thought, it's going to cost the post office like Nova Posta, it's going to be about 15,000 euros to deliver 8,000 copies of the book, one to each home in the whole of Port Glasgow. So I thought, that's a lot of money to give to basically the government post office, you know. So I talked to the local boys football team and I said, if you can deliver the books yourselves, I can give you 15,000 euros and you can spend the money on whatever you want. You can go trips abroad, new football kit. And they said, of course, fantastic. So I proposed this to the local council, which is the equivalent of Lvov Oblast, you know, and I said, and they held the money for me, you know, I've got this great idea, you know, it's about feeding money back into the community. It's all about the ethics of my work. It fits conceptually. It's this idea that images should serve the subject matter, not exploit them. And they were like, no, you can't do it. What happens if one of these kids gets attacked when they're delivering a book? And I said, it's much less likely that one of these kids is going to get attacked than a stranger who's come to deliver the books, you know. So we had a big argument. They nearly closed the project, and in the end, they agreed. And I think this is the first day of the kids delivering the books, and it's still, I would say, probably the best day of my life, just to see these swarms of kids in this really poor town knocking on people's doors saying, here's your free copy of the book, and seeing people's just surprise, you know. Here I am looking a bit like a paedophile in this one, I have to say, a bit dodgy. Yeah, so this is the letter we had to write to the local council to get them to agree that we give the money to the kids and not to the post office to deliver the books. And so I finished the project, the books got delivered, and then I suddenly started getting all these emails from people, some very positive and some very negative, and all these articles in the local newspaper. So the equivalent of the newspaper, like the Greenock Telegraph it's called, which is the equivalent of, I don't know, in Kiev it would be the Kiev Post or something. So this is a typical reaction. Not sure what you're trying to gain from this or what the reason behind it is, but I wish you luck in achieving it. So that was a very usual reaction, that people couldn't understand, why are you giving this book to me for free? You know, what do you want from me? Are you from the Mormons? Do you want a donation? You know? So there was a lot of apprehension. And then every day the local newspaper would run a, are you for the book? Do you hate it? What do you think about photography? This is Betty, who's on the front cover. So she loves it, you know. I love the book. I look through it every night. I know a lot of people in it. I can't get over how good the photos are. Thank you, Betty. Thank you. This person thinks I'm exploiting people in the town because I don't live there, you know, even though I was going back and forth there for a year and a half. And everyone recognized me and knew me. It was still, you know, this is an outsider looking in with a prejudiced view. This is the manager of the local boys football team. And again, he can't bring himself to be completely positive about the project because although it raised money for them, it's an art book, you know, it's not like a tourist promotion of Port Glasgow, and that's very difficult for a lot of people to try and, you know, understand. This one's kind of positive. But the most extreme reaction I had was that all the Protestant residents in one particular street, they had a street meeting, so about 200 people got together, and they took their copies of the book and they dumped them at the back of a Catholic club and set fire to them because they thought there were too many pictures taken in Catholic pubs and churches and not enough pictures taken in Protestant pubs and clubs and churches. So I went through the book afterwards, and I think there's 9 images taken in Catholic venues and 7 in Protestant venues. So that slight imbalance was enough to cause a book burning. Very strange. But that's one of the wonderful things about making a public art project, is you don't know how people are going to respond. Whereas if I do an exhibition in a gallery, I pretty much know how people are going to respond, if it's a good show, what kind of reaction you're going to get. They certainly don't burn the work normally. So that's a fascinating gauge of how art can really look at different racial tensions, religious tensions, social tensions, and expose them inadvertently. So about 2 years after that, I decided to exhibit the work at a big museum in Oxford, in Britain, called Modern Art Oxford. And I spent about 2 years being approached by people saying, do you want to exhibit the work? Can I have a copy of the book? Can I have a copy of the book? And I had to say, no, you can't have a copy of the book. It's just for people in Port Glasgow, you know. But after 2 years of these approaches, I kind of gave in, because after all, I do want to be an artist. I do want to have a career. I do want the work to be talked about. So I agreed to do this exhibition, but instead of just having prints on a wall, I wanted to give the people of Port Glasgow a voice. So all that community reaction, the emails, the phone calls I got, the newspaper articles, they're all shown as well. And I think about 30% of any sales of prints went back to people in Port Glasgow. So again, it was about trying to find a way to continue this model of using photography to serve the subject matter in a real way. But the most amazing reaction was the book started to become very popular. So the total project cost about, I don't know, 100,000 euros, I guess, which for 8,000 books breaks down to about a cost of 12 euros per book, if you want to look at it like that. Suddenly these books became very rare and valuable and were selling on eBay for like $500–600. So, and that made the people who had burnt their copies of the book even more angry. You know, they were like, fuck, you know, first he insults us and then he tricks us by making the books valuable, you know, and we've burnt them. But it was a wonderful feeling again, because it meant that people in Port Glasgow who don't like photography could still benefit in some real practical, tangible way financially from having a copy of the book. So I'm going to leap forward a bit. That was 2003. So I did lots of work after that. And I'm going to talk about Afghanistan. So about 2010, so about 7 years after that, I got a call from the War Museum in London. And every 10 or 20 years, they'll send an artist to a war zone and ask them to make a project. And that's been going on since World War I. In fact, the World War I poets or World War I painters like Paul Nash. So I was asked to become part of that tradition. And I'd never been to a war zone before. But I guess something about my grandfather's history, his own post-traumatic stress disorder when he came back from World War II, and how much damage he'd done to the family when he came back, actually, began to interest me. And I thought, maybe I can give a unique vision, you know, if I go to Afghanistan. So I went for an interview. I think they interviewed 5 artists, and within a month, they decided they would send me to Afghanistan with the paratroopers, which is the Airborne Brigade, which is the biggest brigade in the British Army. It's got about 8,000 soldiers in it. And within a month, I had to get in shape. I was about 45 at the time, so I'm 55 now. I had to get in shape. I had to write letters to my family saying I'm going to a war zone, I might not come back, or I might come back with no legs or blinded or whatever. And I had to mentally prepare myself for the fact that I'd be going to a war zone for 3 months. So very strange feeling, but the overriding thing was this huge gap between what I saw there, what I experienced, and the way in which the BBC television presented the war in Afghanistan at the time. So this is 10, 11 years ago, 2010. This is all the kit I took with me. So I was uniquely responsible for all this equipment. So you've got film cameras, movie cameras, slow motion cameras, tripods, batteries, cables, film stock, gas mask. And I must have been on and off a helicopter about 50 times during 3 months. And each time I was responsible for getting all this equipment on and off a helicopter. So incredibly stressful physically as well as psychologically. So I won't show everything from that. One of the things I did there was shoot on a plate camera, so shoot on film. So all the images I'd seen from Afghanistan on the news were clearly shot on digital. And so I thought, I'm going to take a plate camera and a big flash. And I guess one of the most shocking things for me was how young people were. So not just the soldiers, but also, you know, the local kids, you know, completely unaccompanied by adults. And these guys, these are soldiers, you know, and you have to be 18 to serve in the British Army, but they look, I don't know, about 14 or 15 to me, very young. And of course, one of the worst things about going to a war zone is going out on patrol. So I was out on patrol about 30 times. And when you're out on patrol, you're in a line with soldiers, and there's about 2 meters between each soldier. And the guy at the front has a metal detector because the Taliban were using explosive mines at the time, improvised explosive devices. So there was a huge amount of people being blinded or losing their legs. So you had to stay in line because you knew if you stepped left or right, you could step on a landmine. And then you not only endanger your own life, you endanger the life of the person in front of you and the person behind you too. So imagine this, you're walking for hours, every step feels, you know, possibly very, very dangerous and frightening. And then suddenly you'll see kids come out of nowhere and they're completely unaccompanied, no adults to be seen, no houses. And you think, who's looking after them? You know, where are they going? Really shocking. And then very quickly I had to bend down, take a picture, you know, put my film in, adjust my flash, my aperture, take the picture and walk on before the guy behind me caught up. So I was there for 3 months and I actually came back with post-traumatic stress disorder, go figure. So I really found out what my grandfather felt. So it's a bit like, imagine if you put a cat in a field and you let bombs off around the cat day and night. The cat might still survive, but it won't be the same animal afterwards. You know, it's the same with people. If you do that to people for 2 or 3 months, the stress is so enormous that you change, you know. But I have to say, one of the best things about being there was the friendships I made. So I made very strong friendships with some of the soldiers because you become very close very quickly under those conditions. And this guy, Mike, used to be my best friend. He left the army about a year after I got back from Afghanistan. And he came to find me, and I was living in East London, and we became great friends. And it was very important for me to recover from my own trauma, and it really helped being able to talk to someone who had been through the same thing. So Mike, when he left the army, he became a professional wrestler. And he couldn't see the connection between this kind of very theatrical latex rubber thing he was doing and under the railway arches in East London. He couldn't see the connection between that and the real fighting that he'd done in Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq. But for me, it was clearly some kind of cathartic working through. So Mike committed suicide a year ago. He never came to terms with his post-traumatic stress disorder. I begged him repeatedly to go and get help. He never did. So did his wife. Everyone that knew him loved him, but no one could convince him to get therapy for the trauma. When I came back in 2011, it took me about 2 years to recover. So I was on a course of sertraline, which is an antidepressant which they subscribe to American troops quite a lot, and also therapy, of course. But I really wanted something good to come out of the whole experience. So I thought, what about I do a book, again with a targeted dissemination, and I try and encourage troops who are feeling a bit uncomfortable about coming forward and talking about their trauma, try and encourage them not to feel stigmatized, not to feel ashamed to come forward and talk. So I went to the Ministry of Defence in London and I said, I've got this great idea for a book. It's not a criticism of the British Army. It's not a criticism of the Ministry of Defence. The only thing I want to do is to encourage troops who are traumatised to come forward and get help. Because I got help, but it took me 6 months to admit that I had a problem when I came back. So if it takes me 6 months to admit, how long is it going to take a soldier who's been told all his life, you know, to be a man, not to talk about it, not to be weak? So I said, I'm going to do this amazing book, Battle Against Stigma. And we're going to get stories from troops who used to think that PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, was bullshit, but now they know it's real because they've suffered from it or their friends have suffered from it. So we're going to get these stories from current and previous soldiers. And I'm going to accompany that with my own story about my own trauma when I came back and my own treatment. And also my pictures from Helmand, Afghanistan. And first off, the Ministry of Defence in Whitehall in central London were like, we love it, it's great, fantastic. I said, super, you can even write a chapter in the book, you can put your logo in it, we can celebrate your achievements in this field of treating disorder. And they seemed so positive. And then about a week later, they were like, actually, we don't like it. We forbid you, we absolutely forbid you to reproduce the images you took in Helmand, Afghanistan with these stories from soldiers about trauma. You can't do it. So I said, okay, I respect that. I promise you, I will not reproduce them in the same book. So this was like my fuck you to the Ministry of Defence. So I had one book of my pictures and the other book of these accounts of trauma from soldiers. And they were reproduced in 2 volumes in one slipcase. So this got printed in Spain, in Barcelona, in 2015 by a big family company run business called Graphos, who have been making art books for 80 years. Okay, so they're very good at this kind of thing with slipcases. And they printed 1,500 copies, and the copies came over in 2 consignments. So the first consignment of 500 copies was seized, was taken by UK Border Force. So UK Border Force is like the customs, you know? And they apparently have strong connections with, go figure, the Ministry of Defence. So, you know, they tried to fuck me back, ostensibly. But the second delivery of books came via a different route. 1,000 copies arrived safely in my studio. And then I spent all of summer 2015, so what's that, 6 years ago, furiously, desperately trying to send these books out to mental health charities, to homeless centres, to prisons, prison libraries, all the places where you end up as a troop if you don't get treated for post-traumatic stress disorder. Because you lose everything. You end up drinking too much, doing drugs, you become violent, you know, you just disintegrate, basically. So I was really trying to reach that audience, those people who are traumatized, to try and encourage them to get some help. And I knew that the UK Border Force at any moment could knock on my door of my studio, and they had the right, apparently, to seize these books. So it was a race against the clock to try and get these books out. I also wrote about my own experience with trauma in one of the big local big national newspapers, The Independent. And it went online as well on, I think, 23rd of May, I think, 2015. So I wrote about my own journey with trauma after the war. And at the end of it, I said, if your friend or your mother or your family member or your brother is suffering from trauma after war, get in touch with me at this email address, and I'll send you a free copy of this book. And as soon as that went online, I got an email every 10 minutes for 3 months from a veteran, or the family member of a veteran, or the mother of a veteran, or the colleague of a veteran, saying, I went through exactly the same thing that you did, and there was no support for me, and this happened, and that happened, and this is what happened when I was in the war zone, and I came back, and there was no support. So I realised, this is the first project I really realised, that the work was touching other people, that it was actually reaching an audience and doing some good. And so these thousands of emails I received now constitute a kind of archive about modern warfare. And they are currently held in King's College in London as a kind of archive about modern war. So I think this is one of the first emails I got. Some are very personal, like this. This is a guy talking about his son and how distant his son is since he came back from Afghanistan. And others go into incredible detail about what it's like to fly in a tornado airplane. And this guy describes it as watching death TV. So he had a little monitor about 9 inches across in black and white. And when he dropped a bomb on a target, he could see these little figures suddenly disintegrate into pixels. And he saw this every day, more or less, when he was in Afghanistan for months. And he didn't think about it twice. But as soon as he came back to Britain, he just every night, he'd have these nightmares. Death TV, he used to call it. And the other really strange thing is, I got an email from Kiev Military Hospital in Ukraine saying, we've heard about your book. We want to give it out to veterans from Donbass. We're currently getting a lot of people who've not only lost legs and eyes and limbs and been really badly injured, they're also psychologically damaged. And we really appreciate what you've done with this project. So I was amazed, you know, I'd never been to Ukraine before. And suddenly this, it's a horrible word, but this post-Soviet country was wanting what I'd made. Whereas my own supposedly deeply democratic British society had tried to effectively ban and censor my book. So I was so blown away. I was like, well, I don't have a Ukrainian language version of the book, unfortunately, but I'll have it translated into Ukrainian and do a PDF and send it to you. And I thought, no, I've also got to go out there and meet these people. So this was 2016, 15 or 16, I think. I went for the first time to Ukraine and just fell in love with your country, actually. So directly after that, every time I had an opportunity to come to Ukraine and make work, I would take it. So for example, this is a big project I did about the displaced. So as you know, more than 2 million people have been displaced from Donbass over the past 7 years. That's a conservative estimate. And yes, it's one of the biggest displacements of people anywhere in the world at the moment. You know, it's on a par with places like Sudan, you know. And anyway, I don't need to tell you this. So this picture was taken in Svitozhorsk, where a lot of people from Donetsk went to, and they're staying in sanatoria in very tiny rooms. Something like 100 different families moved to different sanatoria in Svitozhorsk. These kids were originally from Donetsk. This is at Kiev Dance Academy. This is Zhytomyr schools for the blind, for the deaf rather, who have been taking in kids from Donetsk as well. I think this is 2015. This guy, Alexander, was tortured by separatists, lost his leg. They did a mock execution of his wife. They separated. He went to Zhytomyr and started a goat farm, which has become very successful. Anna, displaced from Crimea. Mariupol police force. This is a place called Stalingrad, nicknamed Stalingrad. It's actually a checkpoint in Avdiivka, which has been bombed so many times. And you can see the kind of stumps of trees here, that they nicknamed it Stalingrad. I think this is 2017 or 18. This is Chernobyl. So I went to Chernobyl last year for the first time in February, and went there and caught the coronavirus there. So very strange to go to Chernobyl and get coronavirus anyway. So I brought it back to England with me and was very sick for about 3 or 4 months. So that was for the New York Times. This is Chernobyl again. This is a Greek Orthodox church in Bakhmut in Donetsk. This picture I took about 2 months ago. This is about 4 kilometers from the front line in a town called Zolote. This I took last week. This is in Kiev. This is Kiev Lavra Church. I really like this picture because it seems to kind of connect religion with mafia. So I kind of, these kids are from the choir, and I found this location where they're selling these spires on the grounds of Kiev Lavra, and they look so serious. I was like, can you just put your hand in your jacket like this, like Don Corleone? Give me some mafia overtones. A dinner lady in Kharkov. This is Christina. So I was in Avdiivka in 2017 when they were shelling quite heavily. And I was driving around with my fixer, my assistant, and the shelling started, and we decided we just had to go and hide somewhere. So we knocked on a door, and someone from the basement came up, let us in, and there was a grandmother with Christina there. And when the shelling stopped, we came up, and Christina had this kind of makeshift play area in the garage, and she started kind of doing these mock screams, which were kind of mimicking the screams and the shelling noises she'd heard. And it was really fascinating. It was like play became this kind of way of processing the trauma. Yeah, so like I say, every time for the past 5 years that I've had a chance to do work in Ukraine, I've taken it. So for example, the New York Times in 2017 said to me, Mark, we're doing a special magazine all about people going on holiday in their own country. You can go to Bali, you can go to Miami, you can go to New Zealand, anywhere you want. Where do you want to go? Take me to Odessa. I want to go to Odessa. So I was there for 2 weeks. Fantastic, loved it. And it was all about people, Ukrainians going on holiday, you know. So I think this is Sveta and Raiza. And every summer, they get the bus from Kiev, takes them 7 hours. They watch 2 or 3 movies on the bus, they arrive, they have their 2 weeks in, you know, very loyal to Odessa as a holiday location. And they say, you know, we know the water is better in Turkey, but we still prefer the beaches in Odessa.
Mark, may I ask you, how do you communicate with them? Let's say with those women.
I've been very lucky to have some good fixers. So a fixer is like a journalistic assistant. And I'm also learning Russian now, thanks to Sveta, who's at the back there. Thank you, Sveta. So now I'm actually having some conversations with people. This is Julia. So I'd taken a picture of her in the zoo in Kiev. And I said, you know, I'm going to Odessa in 3 weeks' time. She said, so am I. And I take my monkeys and my parrots with me. And they come in and say, fantastic. Yeah, so this is... Yeah, so you get the idea. So anyway, to summarize, all these pictures that I've taken over the past 4 or 5 years are in a new book called Stop Tanks with Books. And again, I'm going to employ this activist targeted strategy of sending books out for free to try and impact on an issue that I feel strongly about. So, you know, it's pretty pretty naive to think that I can stop tanks with books, but that's what the book is called, and that's what the purpose is. So I'm sending it out for free to international media, to people involved directly in the Minsk agreements, to MPs in European MPs, Russian MPs, in fact, Ukrainian MPs. And the idea is twofold. One is to galvanize support for seriously trying to end the war. Now, we all know there's only one person who can end the war, and his name begins with P. But obviously, international community can help with putting pressure on making that happen. Probably it's going to do no good at all. Probably it's going to do no good at all. But I have a small platform as an artist. I've got one of the best art book publishers in the world, Style, who are going to print the books for me for free. And it'll be a beautiful big book. The book's going to be in 3 languages. So each book will contain English, Russian, Ukrainian. It's got research about who the displaced are from the Centre for Eastern European Studies in Berlin, who did a massive survey about Donbass and the political views of people in Donbass. It's got photographs that I've taken over the past 5-6 years. And the other thing we're going to try and do is give some mental health support for people living on the front line. So we're trying to encourage the World Health Organization and other big organizations to try and increase the support for those people living within 20-30 kilometers along the front line. So this was strange. This is a bridge called Stanica Luhanska in Luhansk, and it's one of the few places where you can cross from Ukraine into the grey zone, into occupied territories. And so this is effectively, you know, LPR and DPR, Russian-controlled parts of Ukraine. And now this has been refurbished, but when I was there 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, people had to cross, you know, sometimes carrying coffins, sometimes wheelchairs. You know, and I started, this is me with the stupid hat on, I started setting up my lights, and then suddenly, on the Russian side, people were like, what's that strange English guy over there doing with all his lights and everything? And then they started videoing me as well. Very strange. So I'm going to finish just talking about a recent project which is a bit lighter. This is called Parade. It was nominated for the Deutsche Börse Photo Award last year. It's all about the kind of lovely mystical relationship between people and animals in Brittany in France. So whilst I've been making all this Ukraine work, I also made work for an art centre in France, in Brittany. And I would go over for a couple of weeks at a time. And I started the project when Britain voted to leave the European Union. And I was so disgusted with Britain at that decision, I decided I'm not going to make work in Britain anymore. I'm just going to make work in France and Ukraine. And this was kind of the result. This guy's a horse whisperer. So he works with abused horses and encourages them to trust people again. And part of that process, he gets them to stand on an abandoned, on this old Volvo, which has got a kind of mat on top of it. Very strange. Yeah, there you go. So these images were shown at the Art Centre in France and also at the football stadium. So they have a massively popular football team there in Guingamp, it's called, who are mostly farmers. And every weekend they go to the football match. And so we decided to do a big exhibition of the prints on the walkway to the football stadium here. And yeah. It's a big centre for production for food as well, of course. So these are free-range chicken coops where actually they have 100,000 chickens, no ventilation, no windows, and you go in and the noise is just awful and the smell is awful. But these are still called free-range because the chickens aren't in little cages. Yeah. So, and probably the best known image from this project is all these hunting dogs on Patrick's farm. He's over there. He has about 50 of them. And the idea was to try and get them all looking at the camera at the same time. So I spent about 3 days there with Lucy, and that was the only time in 3 days when Lucy and all the dogs were looking towards the camera all at the same time. But shortly after that, this is a kind of little bridge collapsed from the weight. So all these dogs were like, oh. And I really like it because it's so, it doesn't really fit to one genre or another. It's not fashion, it's not wildlife photography, it's not trying to sell you anything. So I think when you make an image which fits between these different genres, then you can find a way to communicate something different maybe. And I also like the fact that people look at it and think it's Photoshop or collage at first, and then they're like, no, actually that looks real, you know. My stupid Instagram account. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you so much for listening. I'm very happy to answer any questions if you want. I won't be offended if not. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
You are presented, so now you mostly live here in Ukraine with your wife or your girlfriend?
No, yeah. No, I live in Kiev now, so I've been here since October. So I was very sick with the virus last spring in London, and then I've been saying to everyone, I'm going to move to Ukraine. For 5 years I'd be saying that, and I thought, fucking hell, Mark, just do it. Stop talking about it and do it. So I did. I moved here in October, and I'm really happy here.
And what plans do you have, like in the future? What would you like to do for projects?
Well, the next thing is trying to get this book out. So the publisher, Stidel, had been delaying because of problems with COVID. So they're in Germany. So now they promise me in the autumn the book will be printed. When it's printed, that's the first stage. The next stage is the publicity campaign. So I have to be very active trying to get the book to make some kind of impact or difference. So that's the main thing. I've also been approached by the Holocaust Museum in Kiev, who have a very controversial reputation at the moment, Babin Yar. So I'm debating whether I should accept that commission or not. I'm also fascinated by the mining community. I always have been, because I grew up in a mining community in Britain. And of course, the miners at the moment are going through incredible hardships, you know, with wage arrears, terrible working conditions. So I've been to mines in Donetsk, Luhansk, and now in Lviv region in Chivonograd today.
You're working on this.
Today I was there, yes.
Also another project, the mining.
Yes, it's another project. So I'm just carrying on working, doing my thing, yeah.
And how, if to compare like photography in England and in Ukraine, what is the most difference for you, and what do you like the most here?
The only advantage of London is you have a lot of big major museum shows, big international museum shows, which is nice to see. But for the rest, the photographic community in Ukraine is really strong. So especially street photography, I find extremely strong in Ukraine. So it's just a matter of time before that really breaks through. And it's such an exciting time to live here as well. You know, when Ukraine is still very young in its modern incarnation, you know, it's only 30 years old in a way, you know, so there's all those kind of possibilities that it has. So for me, that's incredibly exciting. And I'm very fortunate to be, you know, to be connected to it, part of it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what about people you are photographing? Do they like, I don't know, about their reaction? Are they like more angry than in England? Or I believe that our people are a bit like scary that they are photographing.
No, I think now I can speak. Unfortunately, I'm learning Russian, which is very bad of me. I know in current climate, even though I'm making anti-Kremlin books, I should learn Ukrainian, but I'm not. I'm learning Russian. Mm-hmm. And so I can converse with people in Russian a little bit, thanks to Sveta. And so I'm taking Russian lessons 3 times. So I can say, you know, And if someone, you know, is a bit hesitant, I just say, oh my God, очень красиво, женщина, oh, пожалуйста, мне надо фотографировать, пожалуйста, пожалуйста. And then normally they say, okay then. So, you know, there are ways of prostituting myself basically to get photographs.